Welcome back to Wooden Sticks. As always, we are recording from the Aquarius Home Services studio. And the studio is on the road, recording from beautiful Calgary, Alberta here on a Friday. We are on the precipice of a celebration that I look forward to every single year. It's my favorite holiday on the calendar. It is Thanksgiving back in America. And we're in the middle of another road trip, a successful road trip already. I can say that for the Minnesota Wild. They started out in St. Louis, a game that we did not cover on FanDuel Sports Network, but ESPN Plus had, and a win in St. Louis. And then we did the game last night, as I record this, in Edmonton, and got to watch Marc-Andre Fleury do something we've never seen him do before, which is let in a puck from the far blue line in the opening minute of the game and then rally to play. A really rock-solid game with 29 saves against the Edmonton Oilers team that had won 5 out of 6. McDavid and Draisaitl were humming. A lot of talk around Edmonton about a team that once again had gotten off to a slow start and found their mojo. And remember, this is the same team that got off to that slow start a year ago and ended up going to the Stanley Cup Finals. So another validation that this Wild hockey team is for real. And we're going to get into a lot of the storylines with this team throughout the show. But I thought it'd be a good time to go guest-free and be thankful for what has been a great run here with this show. Really excited about where it's headed. But going all the way back now, 6 months. Lou Nanne, our first guest on the show, and why not start with The Godfather? And just some tremendous hockey conversations. You can go back and find those wherever you get your podcasts. But to be thankful for everything we've got here. And I'll start by saying, getting the opportunity to do this show and to reconnect with the great men and women in our game. Just fabulous. I got to tell you, a couple Mondays ago, sitting on my couch watching the Hall of Fame inductions and getting a little choked up with Natalie Darwitz and Chrissy Wendell-Pole, both former guests here on Wooden Sticks and players that I've known since they were in high school. And seeing them going into the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto was really inspiring. It was really awesome for me as somebody that really enjoys the pomp and circumstance of that, and I understand what a big deal that place is, having traveled to Toronto and been there a handful of times. I mean, you're talking about the halls that house Bobby Orr and Gordie Howe and Wayne Gretzky and all those great Montreal Canadian teams. In fact, there's a locker room built inside the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto that pays tribute to some of those dynasty teams that the Canadians had, specifically back in the late 70s, that played at the Montreal Forum. And they recreated the locker room, and you can walk around and look at Ken Dryden's goalie pads and see where Guy Lafleur sat. And yes, Mario Tremblay and Jacques Lemaire, who were the original 1-2 punch of the Minnesota Wild's coaching staff when this organization started 24 years ago. So really neat to see those two ladies enter the Hall of Fame, and it reminded me of just how lucky I am to have this platform to connect with some of the greats. And we've had some wonderful shows. We look forward to many more. But as we approach Thanksgiving, and we're going to talk a lot about that holiday, I want to make sure I thank all the guests we've had here, and thank you for listening to the show, because it's a labor of love. And, even on these road trips where you get up early, and thankfully my producer, Alex, who's so good at what he does, got up with me this morning. It's a little before 8 o'clock in the morning here in Calgary, so it's a little before 9 back home while we're recording this. And it's a time to reflect and to be thankful for everything you've got in your life, and hockey a big part of that. And so I'll start by, I really haven't talked a ton about my hockey journey and how I came to the game, but I was thinking about it this morning as I was preparing for the show. And, I'm going to be 58 here in a couple of months in February. And so I started playing hockey at the age of 5, and my first organized season was at age 6. So I've had a hockey season now for over 50 years. I've had 52 of them. And this is my 19th year with my current gig as a reporter for the Minnesota Wild and traveling with the hockey team. But I go back to when I first started playing the game in Burnsville, and got started by really just being curious about the game. I used to watch sports on TV as a youngster, and I fell in love with hockey. There was a cartoon during the intermissions on some of the nationally televised hockey games. And, when I was growing up in the 70s, we didn't have cable. There was, a handful of channels. But Peter Puck was the intermission cartoon. And he was a puck that talked. And he would go over some of the rules and the nuances of the game of hockey. And then as I started watching a little closer, I noticed the goaltenders and the special equipment, and more importantly, those really cool masks that they wore. And I wanted to be a goalie. And it started all with, my dad taking me downstairs in the basement and shooting either tennis balls or Nerf balls at me. And I had the street hockey mask and some of the street hockey gear, and it just kind of morphed into me being a goaltender at a young age, starting in mites. I played one game as a skater, and I wore number 7 in that game, and I scored a goal. I vividly remember scoring the goal, and it was really cool. It's always fun to score in the game of hockey, but it didn't compare to what I felt when I played that position in between the pipes, and so that was where I wanted to be. And as the years would go on, Thanksgiving was a big part of my hockey experience, because growing up in Burnsville, and it was a booming time to be down there in God's country, as I call it, because the population was at a peak, in the mid to late 70s and into the 80s. That's when Burnsville was a lot like we see Maple Grove right now, where you had a bunch of families that had migrated there. The circle around the Twin Cities had grown out, and kind of like Lakeville the last couple of years, which is just further south than Burnsville. That was a very popular destination. Burnsville Center had just opened up, and so what a time to play hockey in Burnsville. So we had some good teams, and we always hosted a Thanksgiving tournament in our youth hockey days. And, back in those days, you had these jackets that you wore, and it was your team colors, and it usually had your team or your town name on the back. So Burnsville and arch letters in the back, this black jacket with gold lettering. And then when you played in these tournaments, you got these patches, and you'd bring this patch home from the tournament, and you'd get your parents to either iron it on or sew it on. And then, as you played and up through the squirts, into the peewees, into the bantams, that jacket would just get filled up with all these really cool tournament patches. And Burnsville had this really awesome turkey patch. It was, it was in the shape of a turkey. It looked like a turkey. And then it was their traditional Thanksgiving tournament. And what was neat about that tournament is it ran consecutively with other levels. So when you were in squirts, the peewees and bantams were there. So you were looking up to some of the older kids that played hockey in your community. And then it was a big gathering place during the week of Thanksgiving into the weekend right after that Thanksgiving celebration. And so it was an awesome time, kind of at the start of your season. And you were always looking forward to the tournaments, whether they were in town or out of town, to measure up against teams you didn't normally see. And what was neat about hockey in the 70s and 80s in the Twin Cities is because it was such a great hockey market and there were so many good teams in Minnesota, being the state of hockey as we call it now, teams would travel from Canada. I remember vividly what a big deal it was when the Thunder Bay would bring their youth teams down. They were always some of the best teams. It was a team that was hard to compete with, but a lot of times Thunder Bay would come to some of the tournaments we played in. We got to test our skills with the kids that grew up north of the border, and that was a big measuring stick for all of us in youth hockey in the Burnsville area. So that's where it all started. And then, when you got to the high school level, the season had just started. And so it was always a time of great hope. And we'd always have tryouts in late October, and in early November, the high school season would kind of commence. And, in Burnsville, we had a really good football program. And so for the years that I and I graduated in '85 from Burnsville. Those years in the mid '80s, a lot of our key players, including Scott Bloom, who would go on to score the winning goal not only in 1985 in my senior year, but the year after in 1986. He basically took over the state tournament. Those players were still on the gridiron, so we got them late. And remember the Prep Bowl used to be in the Metrodome. It's a tournament that would conclude on the football side around Thanksgiving weekend. So that always signaled the time when we got our football players back to our varsity hockey team, and then we were off and ready to go. And as I mentioned, some of our key players were multi-sport guys. Hockey's become a lot more myopic here in the modern times, and kids don't always play as many sports. But, growing up in the 80s on the high school side like I did, most of us played more than one sport. And so some of those guys would eventually end up back at the rink, but it wouldn't be till usually that weekend of Thanksgiving or the week right after that when we got our guys back. And on to college I went. Actually, before I got to St. Thomas, I played a year in the USHL. I played in Des Moines with the Buccaneers, and I got to say I'm thankful for a lot of things with that year. Playing in a goalie position at Burnsville in the mid '80s, we had really good teams, and so I didn't see a ton of shots. I actually missed a chunk of my sophomore year with a broken collarbone, and so even though we won a state championship my senior year, there were a lot of nights where I was just a passenger along the way, and we were out shooting teams, 35-10. So my skills were fine, but they needed to be ramped up, and so that year in the USHL really allowed me to play the position the right way, to get out of the house for the first time and be away from home. And I played for a really bad team. The Des Moines Buccaneers in 1986, which was my year in the USHL, were an awful hockey team. Great bunch of guys, but we stunk. And it's part of the reason I ended up there. And, my stats were really good, even though, as I just mentioned, I didn't have to do a ton when I was on that Burnsville team in '85 that would go on to win the tournament. My stats looked great. And so the Buccaneers were going through a stretch where they weren't very good, and they had back then that draft. And so they picked me early in the draft. I got the notification that I was invited not only to camp, but I was one of their top draft picks, and off I went to Des Moines after my senior year. And so really thankful for that opportunity. The folks in Des Moines were outstanding. I didn't know, again, I was an 18-year-old kid. I'd really never left the Twin Cities for any real stretch of time. And I assumed it was farm country where I was going, and just the opposite. Des Moines is a really cool city. It's kind of a smaller version of Minneapolis, and some great places down there to hang out. And I loved my time in Des Moines. And our head coach was a guy named Jim Wiley. And Jim would eventually go on to end up coaching the San Jose Sharks at the National Hockey League level. He's an awesome coach and a really good human being. Sadly passed away a couple years ago. And he was from Tulsa, Oklahoma. He was, he'd chew tobacco and he'd bark out orders, and we practiced early in the morning. A lot of us had jobs during the day or went to community college. And so we'd skate every day at the Des Moines Arena from 7 a.m. to roughly 8:45. Then you'd shower and get out of there somewhere around 9:30. You had the whole day in front of you. But, Thanksgiving that year, it was my first time out of the house. And so I went down in September. We did training camp. We stayed in these Army barracks. You didn't get your billet family until you made the club. And so we'd show up, and there were probably 50, 60 guys in camp. And I was one of like 8 goalies looking for 3 spots. And I knew they had drafted me, but you don't know, right? You get down there in September, and then you go through a couple of weeks of training camp. They pick the team, and the season starts in October, and it's a whirlwind. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit homesick. Like I said, I had really never left the house for more than a weekend. And so Thanksgiving, my dad kept saying, just hang in there, get to Thanksgiving, and, it'll all work out. He was right. And I'll never forget that year Thanksgiving, because I hadn't seen my family. They would eventually end up coming to a bunch of games the second half of the season, but they kind of wanted me to get settled in with that, the billet family, and getting used to the schedule and all that good stuff. But Thanksgiving, they made the commitment to drive down and spend the holiday at my in Des Moines with my billet family for the meal. And then we were doing our Thanksgiving tradition, which we had done since we were kids. And we always go to the movies on Thanksgiving night as a family. So they drove down with my sisters. My mom and dad did, which I thought, pretty cool. And so we had a great Thanksgiving feast at the Walker family household where I lived, right in Des Moines there. And I'll never forget it, because one of the Rocky movies, and again, there's been so many Rocky movies. I don't know if it was Rocky 2, 3, or 4, but it was one of the Rockies, and immensely popular movies. And so that was our plan to go see the Rocky movie. And so we got done with the feed bag at the Walker's house and drove down to the mall. And I'm not kidding you. And I think, again, it's a different time back then with the movies and how popular they were. But we stood in line for no less than an hour to get to the screening of this movie. It was on multiple screens. It was the big release of the holiday season, at least for Thanksgiving, and had a great old time at the movie. So that again was one of those moments in time I'm very thankful for, to have that kind of family support that mom, dad, and my two sisters, Laura and Kelly, would drive down, make the 3.5, 4 hour trip to Des Moines to spend the holiday with me. And I couldn't come home because we actually had games, I think Friday, Saturday, Sunday that week. We were home. So it was great to have my family down there with me. And as the years went on, as I mentioned, Thanksgiving's always been a really special holiday for me. And I think it goes back to when I was a kid and all those great hockey memories. And now with the Minnesota Wild, it's tradition that the Wild play that Black Friday home game, usually in the early afternoon. That will be the case again this year as they host the Chicago Blackhawks on that Friday, and then come right back in a rare home back-to-back against Nashville on that Saturday. So, very, very fun weekend they had, and that's kind of the tradition with the Wild schedule. So that's kind of a little background into Thanksgiving and my youth hockey days and how I came to love this holiday so much. Looking forward to again this year, spending time with my family. My dad's gone through some health issues, and he's living in an assisted spot over in Apple Valley. He's got early onset dementia. He's got neuropathy, so he's not very mobile. And so this year is going to be a little of a challenge for our family, but we are going to all take our cycle through a turkey with Dad over at his spot, and then my sister Kelly is nice enough to host. And as always, we'll end the holiday at the movie theater. It might just be a group that's a little dispersed. Might be different waves because of the timing with my dad to go see him. But it's funny, he having seen him right before this road trip and knowing I'm going to see him right after, he doesn't miss a game. And my dad is a big time hockey fan. He's been watching it all his life, and he's in his mid 80s right now, and he has fallen in love with Kirill Kaprizov, and I get a big kick out of that because I think a lot of Wild fans end up finding '97 as their top reason for watching the hockey team, and I suppose this is a good time to segue into what we're thankful for within this Wild season. And I'll start by saying this: as we sit here on a Friday recording, I'm thankful that Kirill Kaprizov is, for the most part, healthy. He took a pretty good hit in that game against the Oilers, and it was, I don't think it was a dirty hit. I think it was an awkward hit in the neutral zone. I talked to Wes Walls about this on our flight in last night, and he agreed. He thought that it was a weird position for both players to be in. Bottom line is, last night where I was watching the game I had a little impromptu TV studio set up just outside the Wild locker room where we do our interviews and where we do our media availability with the coach, Coach John Hines, after the game. And so I was stationed literally just 10 or 12 feet outside the Wild dressing room. And when that play happened, I think we all caught our breath a little bit and thought about, oh God, what if this is serious, and what's it going to mean for Kirill and for the team? And so he came walking by with the doctor and the trainers on staff there. And I loved that he was able to walk right past me. And it didn't look like he was limping. At that point, it didn't look like he was in a tremendous amount of pain. But they go back into the locker room, and there's an area there where there's a doctor's office type of deal where they can really take a deep look at what was cooking. And it was no more than, I would say, 5 minutes. And in fact, I was actually doing something with my notes and getting ready for a commercial break that was coming. I was doing something within the broadcast, and he gave me the hey, and I looked up, and he had this look on his face, and he kind of gave the whoo, like we dodged a bullet there. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he goes, "I think so." And then he was walking back because he couldn't wait to get back to the bench. And if you know Kirill like we all do, he couldn't wait to get back in the game. So, I'll start with giving thanks for this guy, this superstar player. I think, the Minnesota Wild, going back to when this whole thing started in 2000, they've had great players. And Marian Gaborik was a home run they hit early on. And he was a terrific hockey player. That magical 2003 playoff run to the Western Conference Final. He was a catalyst on that hockey club, a big part of that team. And he was fantastic. He would go on to win a couple of Stanley Cups with the LA Kings. But he was never looked at like this guy is. And we've seen so many other teams, have these star players. And, Pittsburgh has had Crosby. We looked at the Blackhawks, one of our division rivals, and they've had Taves and Kane along the way. And then one of our other rivals, Colorado, not only do they find Nathan MacKinnon, but they find this Cale Makar, this generational offensive weapon from the blue line. And so it's great to see the Wild now have some star power on their roster. And how do you not be thankful for a guy like Kirill Kaprizov, who not only is an unbelievably talented hockey player, but to be honest, it's the way he goes about his business. The points are great. The goals are beautiful. The talent is obvious. But a guy that is that type of leader and works at the craft the way he does, puts in the time that Kirill Kaprizov puts in, I don't know how to explain the ripple effects. It's the same conversation we have when we converse about Marc-Andre Fleury. When you're would-be Hall of Famer Fleury and would-be superstar Kaprizov are two of the hardest working players on that roster. And I think the best analysis I've heard is Kirill Kaprizov has game-changing talent and works at his craft like he's a fourth-line player hoping to stay in the lineup. That, to me, is a combination that can pay dividends, because every player on this team and every young player that's coming up, and maybe in the next couple of years, you're going to see some more young players come in. But I look at Brock Faber and his transition a year and a change ago from college hockey to the NHL, and the impact a guy like Kirill Kaprizov might have on a guy like Brock Faber. I think Brock's unique in that he grew up in the Twin Cities, and I think one of the great storylines when Brock first started skating with the Wild is that picture that went viral on social media. It was from the season prior, and Brock Faber was sitting on the glass at a Wild game as a Gopher student, as a hockey player in town that played for the Gophers, but he was wearing a Kirill Kaprizov jersey and pounding on the glass, watching Kirill Kaprizov score a goal. And, you move forward 14, 15 months, and they're teammates. And, that's the kind of impact that you want your star player to have. And Brock shows up in the NHL and sees the way this guy works, sees what type of team player he is, how he really truthfully only cares about winning hockey games. And as great as the stats are, and as much fun as it is to rack up those stats, if you're around him, you see it and you feel it, how disappointed he is after a loss. That's the kind of leader you need to have. And so the Wild have found something here, not only on the ice, but off the ice. And I think you're seeing that now dovetail into what Matt Boldy is becoming. He's a young player. He's 23 years old. He's a young kid with talent, but now you're seeing the work ethic and you're seeing the team first mentality and you're seeing the play without the puck. The way that Kaprizov defends, you're seeing some of that in Matt Boldy's game, and you're seeing both their games grow together. What a great coup for Billy Guerin and the Minnesota Wild to have these two young stars attack the game on a daily basis the way they do. And I think the ripple effect is hard to measure, but if you look around that locker room, I mean, it's all boats rise, in my opinion. And having been around the game of hockey as long as I have, this is about as excited as I've been about a team. And then this is almost 2 decades of covering the Minnesota Wild. They've got something special here. And the chemistry they've got behind the scenes, how much they enjoy each other's company, it's a really, really fun hockey team to be around and to work with. And so it's early. And, Thanksgiving is a great time to assess where this club is at, because having covered the league as long as I have, there's this unwritten rule that when you get to American Thanksgiving and you look at the standings for both the Eastern and Western Conference, you look at the top 8 in both the East and the West, the analytics will tell you it's between 80 and 85%. Those top 8 are going to be playoff teams. And if you're near the bottom part of that, if you're a 6, 7, or 8 seed at that point, there's room for some error there. But if you're near the top, which right now the Wild have the second most points in the league at 13-3-3, they've got 29 points. The analytics go up from there. And so, again, it doesn't guarantee you anything. We dodged a huge bullet with the hit on Kaprizov in Edmonton, and clearly a season can take all kinds of turns. And they've been, for the most part, pretty healthy here. But Thanksgiving is the time of year where you reflect and take a look at those standings and say, they're in a pretty good spot. The other thing that really sticks out about this Wild season is they've played 19 games and 12 of them have been on the road. And when we got to training camp this year, a lot of conversation about that first month or month and a half, how many road trips they had, how long they were going to be on the road. Basically, the entire month of October, after those first 2 home games, they were on the road. And that was going to be a challenge. And how they've met that challenge, knowing they've got a bunch of home games here in the second half. If you look at the Wild schedule, specifically in March, they are home a ton. And that's when you start to not only take a look at making the playoffs, but for this team having a chance to secure home ice, maybe a chance to win a division, which is just unbelievable that we're even talking about this here in late November. That's when it gets really exciting. So as we progress here through this Thanksgiving show, we're going to take thanks for some real cool trends that we're seeing with the Minnesota Wild. We're going to kind of dive deep into a couple of different angles with this hockey club, and we're going to do that after a quick pause here. We're basically at the halfway point. I got to start by being very thankful for my dear friend, John Schweitz. We went to St. Thomas together, been friends all the way through those years. He is part of the Minnesota Masonic Charities Foundation, and they do some unbelievable work here in the Twin Cities. They've got the home in Bloomington, of course, especially during COVID, which was just a huge godsend for so many people, elderly people that were in a tough spot. The Children's Hospital, the U of M situation there, and all the great charitable endeavors they do. They're the largest fraternal organization in the country, and we're lucky to have them right here in the Twin Cities. So thank you to John Schweitz and Minnesota Masonic Charities. And, of course, one of our new members here at Talk North, got to thank OnX Hunt.
We mentioned OnX Hunt earlier. Want to let you know that deer hunting season is here, and it's time to own your odds with OnX Hunt, the GPS hunting app trusted by millions of hunters. With the Hunt app, you'll have access to nationwide public and private land ownership information, waypoints, tracks, and much more, all at your fingertips. Go to onxmaps.com/hunt to sign up today.
We're back after this quick pause. All right, welcome back. Second half of the show here. Unique edition of Wooden Sticks. We're going to be guest-free, as I mentioned, on this one show here at Thanksgiving. And we're going to give thanks for all the great things we've got going on. If you're going to do a hockey podcast, and if you're going to be somebody that travels with the team, which I do, and lucky enough to have that gig, a little more fun when the team is having this type of year. And I think it's on the heels of a year last year where, if you page back 12 months from where we are right now, we were over in Sweden, which was really cool. My first time leaving North America. I've traveled through Canada, obviously, and all these NHL destinations now for almost 2 decades, but I had never gone to Europe. It was my first time going, and it was an unbelievable trip. And Sweden was just beautiful. The people were fantastic. The venue was fun. The team was going through a tough time, and they were in the middle of a really tough stretch of hockey, and I'll never forget it because we got back from Sweden. They had lost a couple of heartbreakers over there. They got points in both games. It was an overtime and shootout loss with Ottawa and Toronto. But the elephant in the room was they had lost like 6 or 7 straight, and they had really plummeted in the standings. And there was a lot of tension around this hockey team. It was not a fun time. Spurgeon was basically out for the year. There were injuries left and right, and we went down to Detroit right after Thanksgiving and lost again. And that was the final game that Dean Evason coached. That to me is one of the real hard parts of this job. Is if you're going to work with a team on the broadcast side, it's the lifeblood of the job is establishing trust and respect with the players and coaches, and specifically the head coach. That especially in my spot, if you're going to be down there interviewing the players within the games, being at the practice rink, and traveling with the team, if the head coach doesn't like you, you're in a whole lot of trouble. And had a great relationship with Dean Evason. Still continue to text with him now as he's in Columbus doing some great work down there. But that was a real dark time and a real tough time. So I think it only enhances now the enjoyment we're having with this season. If you're a Wild fan and you went through what you did last year watching this team and seeing them miss the playoffs and the struggles that they had, it felt like at every turn they'd get momentum, they'd get some traction, they'd win some games, and then another injury would pop up. I specifically remember a night in Winnipeg where the Wild had, I think, won 6 out of 7 coming in, and they left the arena with a loss and an injury to Kaprizov and to Gustafsson. And so that, again, was a roadblock in any momentum within the season. And so I think it really points now to a year later being able to be extra thankful and even more excited about where this team is and where this team could go. So when I see folks, whenever I'm traveling around the Twin Cities, going to the dry cleaners or running around doing my errands, people always ask, is this for real? Is this sustainable? And you think about it all the time because, if you're a Minnesota sports fan, which I have been all my life, there's some carnage there. There's some data there that people have a legitimate right to have questions about. And, as I look at this hockey team, and I look at the depth they have and the roster that they've put together, I do see some sustainability. Now, you look at what could have been an injury to Kaprizov, missing Zuccarello right now, and knowing that goaltending is the precipice of probably all of this. Certainly there's going to be some rough patches. This is not going to be a year where they continue on this pace, because right now, as we sit here just about 20 games into the season, they're on pace for like 125 points in the standings, and that's likely not going to happen. As we talked about before the year got going on this show and on a couple other podcasts in town, I thought this team would find their way to 100 plus points. I thought they had a legitimate chance to win a playoff series. As I sit here now at the end of November, almost 2 months into the season, I have no doubt about the 100 plus points. And now I'm thinking, who knows if they can stay healthy towards the end of the season, what kind of run they can make. I don't see a ton of red flags with the style of hockey they're playing. They've got identified roles for each of their lines, and they're interchangeable. Their top 6 can move around a little bit, and John Hynes has been forced now to be creative putting these lines together. With the injury to Zuccarello, I think eventually you're going to reunite Zuccarello with his buddy Kaprizov, and rightfully so. They're magic together. But now you're seeing production from other lines. And even though you've top-loaded your first line with Kaprizov, Ek, and Boldy, and that's a line that last year, if you looked at analytics, dominated. But now you've got a second line where Johansson's getting his game going. Ryan Hartman's starting to show some real signs that he can once again put up some numbers. And this is a guy that a couple years ago scored over 30 goals. And Marco Rossi. We don't talk about Marco Rossi enough. And I know those trade rumors are out there, and I'm just not going to pay attention to them right now because they're probably just rumors. But this kid has put up some impressive numbers. He's been consistently good. You've got that second line humming right now. You're going to get that top line. You're going to get production out of Boldy and Kaprizov damn near every single game. But if you're going to be able to beat teams on the road, good quality teams like the Oilers, you've got to have that secondary scoring. And now you've got Freddie Gaudreau going. And boy, can that have a tremendous impact on this hockey team's success. Freddie Gaudreau plays so many roles on this club. If you get offense out of number 89, that's the bonus. I'm talking shutdown guy. I'm talking penalty kill guy, heart and soul guy. And he's got the hands. That's why he's got such a tremendous lifetime record in shootouts. He's got wicked good hands. And now you're seeing him find his confidence in his game. He's always been a little bit streaky. That's had an effect on Marcus Foligno. So you've got these four lines, and that fourth line has been out there, and they've been able to kind of plug and play. Last night it was Devin Shore in Edmonton. He had a pipe and looked pretty solid in his time on that fourth line, but it's kind of been anchored by two players, Khusnutdinov and Lauko. And what a find Jakub Lauko has been for Bill Guerin. Kind of an under-the-radar trade. I don't think it got a lot of buzz when it happened. And Vinny Lettieri, a terrific player in his own right, probably a better fit with Lauko and what kind of role they need. Lettieri's got some offense to his game. Lauko's a grinder. He's a speed guy. He's a gritty player, and he brings energy every night. And you need that from a fourth line. You don't need the fourth line to go out there and score goals. You need that fourth line to go out there and provide some serious energy and defend the opposition. Don't get scored on, and provide some physical play and some energy. And Lauko and Khusnutdinov have been terrific in that role. They both have a significant role on the penalty kill. So you've got identified different lines that can play different roles on this hockey team, and they're getting production top to bottom on this roster. And the penalty kill went through a really bad stretch. That was a major point of emphasis, not only in the offseason, but as the season progressed. As I sit here going into the weekend before Thanksgiving, the penalty kill has killed off 19 of their last 20, and they've done so in big spots. When you're clinging to a lead on the road in Edmonton and you're staring down the best player right now in the world, Connor McDavid, with his wingman, Leon Draisaitl, that's a moment in time where you've got to find a way to get a big kill. That happened twice last night within that hockey game, and that kill in the third period was huge. It's a big reason they survived and got that win on the road. And some of the players I just mentioned, like Freddie Gaudreau, were a big part of that. And then the other thing you've got to be thankful for right now in the back end is your top four are healthy. Before the season started, I pointed to 7 players that needed to be healthy on this hockey team. And Kaprizov and Boldy and Ek up top are obvious. I guess you could add the 8th one because you've got to have a healthy Philip Gustafsson the way he is playing right now. But the top 4 on that blue line, Faber, Middleton, Brodin, and Jared Spurgeon. If you can keep that core healthy for the most part this season, I think good things are going to happen. We've seen that play out now for almost 2 months, and very thankful that Jared Spurgeon is healthy. You can see what a healthy Jared Spurgeon brings to this team, what a difference it makes to have 46 going. He and Brodin were the ones basically last night. And again, it was some shifts with Middleton and Faber, but the game plan moving in to that game last night was to have as many shifts as possible with Spurgeon and Brodin out there against McDavid. And boy, did it play out nicely. The Wild have been one of the few teams in this league that have been able to limit Connor McDavid, and they've been able to frustrate him. You can't do it without mobile, high-end defensemen, and that's what those two guys bring to the table. And so if you're a Wild fan, it's hard not to be thankful for a healthy Jared Spurgeon and a really good top 4. And I think that the depth that they have on that blue line has played out pretty nicely. They've had all 7 make contributions. Zach Bogosian doesn't get talked about enough. Like Marco Rossi, kind of flies under the radar, and rightfully we talk about Brock Faber and about Middleton's unbelievable season and what he's doing. One of the top plus-minus guys in the National Hockey League is Jake Middleton, but kind of lost in the shuffle is the guy that anchors that third pairing, Zach Bogosian. Big, strong, mobile, physical, team guy. They just love this guy. The big beard, it's awesome what he brings to the table. And then, of course, you've got Merrill and Chisholm kind of rotating in and out of that spot. Right now, Declan Chisholm is the guy that's in that spot and anchoring the quarterback position on that top power play. But really a good core of defensemen that have, again, been a part of the storyline that's allowed the Wild to kind of be one of the great storylines this year in the National Hockey League. So as we look at the numbers, I mentioned 13-3-3 on the road. The Wild are 9-1-2. And then they've got, if you go to NHL.com and you want to surf the stats tab on your device, you'll be, as a Wild fan, pretty pumped up to see when those stats pop up. There's your picture of Kirill Kaprizov. There's your picture of Philip Gustafsson. So on the offensive side, tied for the most points in the National Hockey League is Kirill the Thrill with 34. And then on the defensive side, it starts with the goaltending stats, and it starts with goals against. And there's Philip Gustafsson leading the National Hockey League with a 2.07 goals against. And hard not to be thankful to have that type of start to your season. And we are well into the season now. As you get to the quarter pole in this 82-game marathon, we're just about to game number 20 here this weekend in Calgary. So important time for Wild fans to soak this up and to be excited and to maybe buy in a little bit to what this team is putting out there and believe that this is sustainable, because I do believe it is. I do think that as well as they're playing, I know a few years ago they had a magical start to the year. This was going way back 7, 8, 9 years in the time machine. And Mike Yeo was the head coach, and they were winning games. And as they got even to Christmas, they had the most points in the National Hockey League. But if you looked at the analytics, it was not sustainable. They had some red flags with the way they were winning games. They were scoring on an obnoxious amount, percentage-wise, of their shots. And it looked, at least on paper, like there could be trouble ahead. And that was the year they barely made the playoffs. This doesn't look like that. This doesn't feel like that. I think if you look at the core of this hockey team, and the engine is driven by young stars that tend to, I mean, they both, Boldy and Kaprizov, both look like there's more to give. And then if you look at the support and the depth players on this roster, a lot of the guys I just talked about, their roles are very sustainable. What Marcus Foligno is doing is sustainable. Same thing with Freddie Gaudreau. I think you're going to see a tick up in the offense on the side of Marcus Johansson. And interesting, I think if you point to some of the negative conversation around this team, specifically on social media, the name that continues to come up is Yakov Trenyan. And that came up ironically, in our post-game press conference with John Hynes in Edmonton after that win. And John Hynes was very direct about his assessment of Trenyan, big number 13. And remember, John Hynes has a lot more data than we have because he coached him in Nashville when he was the bench boss with the Predators. And he said, we don't need this guy to go out there and light up the score sheet. What we need this guy to do is exactly what he's doing. We need a physical presence. We need a big, strong body that's going to go to the net. We need a penalty kill guy that's going to clog up the middle of the rink, block some shots. And he said, listen, the offense isn't there yet, but if he had a couple of goals and a couple of assists, we wouldn't even be talking about this because he plays a third and fourth line role. He said, I'm not worried about the offense. I think the points will come. I think the goals will come, but I love the way he's playing. And John Hynes directly said, I really love what he's bringing to our hockey team right now. Good enough for John Hynes. It's good enough for me. So I think that if you look at a way winning hockey teams are constructed, there are different players in different roles, and they all bring what they can to the table, and then you mash that together and hope that when they get out there, they match up well with the opposition. Whatever they're doing right now doesn't need to be adjusted too much. And so if they're winning hockey games and Trenyan's playing the style that John Hynes and that coaching staff want, I'm not here to argue that. I'd love to see a few pucks go in. He's had a couple of close calls, but the bottom line is I don't think they need him to do that. And if Gaudreau is going to provide some offense, if Hartman's going to be the guy I know he can be, and you've got other players that I think have the offensive skill to produce. I look at a guy like Johansson and the hands and the offensive savvy he brings to the table. He scored last night in Edmonton. He's got a couple of goals on the season. You can't tell me that he's not going to find his way to 15 or 20 goals this year. So I think you've still got some players that are going to put up some numbers here as we get to the Christmas break and into the second half of the season. So it's been an awesome start. And I think as a Minnesota sports fan, you have to, at this point now, take a look at the data and say, you know what? This actually can happen. So you can start to think about home ice in the playoffs, I'm already starting to watch the out-of-town scoreboard and the teams that I believe are going to be in this race to win the division specifically. Start with your Minnesota Wild, work your way through the hottest team in the league so far this season, the Winnipeg Jets. Then you have to talk about the Dallas Stars. And that, to me, is the one area of concern. The Minnesota Wild, for whatever reason, the last couple of years have really struggled against Dallas. And there are some skeletons in that closet. And if the season ends and the Wild are in that 2 or 3 spot, they likely could play Dallas again in that first round. And so at some point, you've got to find a way to beat this team. And last year they struggled against those upper echelon teams in the division. We've only seen a couple of games this year, and I don't think we got a fair assessment of the Minnesota Wild. If you go back to that game in Winnipeg early in the season, that first weekend, it was the second of back-to-back. That Seattle home game was a meat grinder. It was physical. It was fast-paced. It was back and forth. The Wild ended up losing that game in extra time and got to Winnipeg late and looked like a tired hockey team. Now, they gutted it out for an overtime loss against the Jets, and the Jets would go on to have this record-breaking start in Winnipeg. And then the game against Dallas, they were missing 3 guys. And no one's making excuses, but I want to see the Wild at full strength against both of these teams before I make that assessment. But that, to me, is if you're a Wild fan and you've still got some apprehension around the start to this season, and you're not quite ready to buy into the hype, those are the games you point to. And so you've got a chance here coming up next week when the Wild get home. Maybe you're listening to this weekend, but on Monday the 25th, the Jets come calling. The Wild will have that afternoon game in Calgary coming up here, and then they'll have a full day off on Sunday to get ready for that. And then if you page forward to right after Christmas, it's the fly the day of the game trick, because with the NHLPA, they have no hockey on the 24th, 25th, and 26th of December. So games commence again after the Christmas break on the 27th. If you are a road team on the 27th, you have a practice at your facility the morning of that game, and you fly out the day of the game and play that night. Not a big deal, but those are the 2 games you look at your upcoming where you can say, okay, I can get a good measuring stick of where the Wild line up against some of the best. The Dallas Stars, to me, are still the team to beat. The Jets have been phenomenal. I think they're a really good hockey team. But if you're looking at the team to beat for me and for my money in the Western Conference, it is the Dallas Stars, and you'll get a chance to see the Wild against both of those hockey teams. Just be thankful, though, that we're not where we were a year ago. And, be thankful that you've got a relevant hockey team with star power that's fun to watch. Bottom line is, you come to sports to be entertained, and this is a very, very entertaining product. Night in, night out, you're getting treated to some terrific hockey. And as I mentioned, this number 97 that you get to watch every night, to me is one of the maybe 5 or 10 best players in the league. I would have to say he's knocking at the top 5 door right now, but for sure top 10. And he is without a doubt the best player to ever wear a Wild sweater, without a doubt in my mind. And what's super cool is, you look at where this Wild team is going. Every team that seems to migrate their way to a cup final, and look at Edmonton last year with the top of their roster. I mentioned McDavid with Draisaitl. There's always a 1 and a 1A, and Matt Boldy is becoming that guy. He is another rising superstar. Right now, as we sit here at nearly the quarter point of the season, on pace for between 40 and 50 goals. Kirill's on pace to surpass 50 and be in that 55 to 60 range. I don't see these 2 guys slowing down. The way they play off each other, the way they attack, the way they are consistently getting grade A chances, and the book is out. Like, every team that the Wild play game plan to shut these 2 guys down. Every single team has layers of defense specifically built to slow these guys down, and they continue to consistently put up the numbers, which tells me this whole thing is sustainable. And so as we get ready for Thanksgiving, definitely had to be thankful for what we've got right now with the Minnesota Wild. And, we're living in Minnesota. High school hockey is upon us. The girls' season is underway. The boys' season is cranking up. You've got college hockey in full swing. There'll be some great holiday tournaments coming up on that front. The Golden Gophers across the river from where we work in St. Paul with the pro team look like they are a national power once again for Bobby Motzko. So if you're a hockey fan and if you're listening to Wooden Sticks, obviously you probably are a hockey fan and you live in this market right now in the Twin Cities. I mean, be thankful. This is a great time to be a fan of the game. Get out and watch some of the local hockey that's available to you. We've got the Frost getting ready to start their season. They're in training camp right now. Tremendous story last year in St. Paul with what they put together in their championship. So we've got a winning team there. We've got boys and girls high school hockey going. We've got college hockey cooking. And your Minnesota Wild right now have the second most points in the National Hockey League. And they have the top scorer and top goaltender sitting here. And it's going to be a really exciting Thanksgiving holiday to enjoy all the hockey that is upon us. And if you're a Wild fan and you want to watch this team up close, you're going to get a bunch of chances over the break here. As I mentioned, they play Winnipeg on that Monday, a showdown with maybe first place in the division on the line. Quick trip to Buffalo on the eve of Thanksgiving. They'll play the Sabres, take Thanksgiving off, and come back for a Black Friday showdown against the Blackhawks with Connor Bedard. And then the Nashville Predators, second of back-to-back on that Saturday, the weekend of Thanksgiving. Andrew Brunette, Darby Hendrickson, part of the coaching staff there with the Predators. Fun to see them come to town, too. They've been a real slow starter. I still think they have a real good chance to be a playoff team, but it's getting late early for Nashville right now, and the Wild will get a good look at the Preds on this upcoming weekend. So I appreciate you guys sticking with us here on Wooden Sticks. As I mentioned, we've had a great run here in our first year doing this. Some great guests planned here throughout the hockey season, and really looking forward to continue to cover this red-hot Minnesota Wild hockey team. So thank you to Alex Haugen, my esteemed producer who helps me with my lack of skills in terms of technology, migrate this podcast from all over the world. As I mentioned today, we're doing this thing from the beautiful city of Calgary. And thank you to Talk North for giving me this platform. I love doing this. I really enjoy connecting with people involved in the game. And it's given me the opportunity to talk to some really fantastic human beings along the way. And I got to say, one of the guests we've had on this show is Ed Olchuk. And he's a longtime friend of mine. In my opinion, the top analyst in the game on the national side. And if you haven't found the video that's circulating on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, it won't be hard to find. If you just go to your device and go to X and type in Edzo Hockey Beats Cancer and spend 3 or 4 minutes watching his self-diagnosis of his battle with cancer. If that doesn't make you thankful for the gifts in your life at this holiday, nothing will. Heartfelt, to the point, knowing Edzo's journey and the struggles he went through throughout the chemo and all the different setbacks he had with his health in the last few years. Just a fantastic, I think it ends up being 4 minutes and like 30 seconds. There won't be one wasted second if you could find that. Thankful for his health, thankful for his friendship, and really something you have to go watch at some point leading up to the holiday here. I think to help put things in perspective, because just a gem of a human being is Eddie Olchuk, and lucky enough to have him as one of our former guests here on Wooden Sticks. And I think I'll close the show right there by saying, find that video and be thankful for everything in your life that you've got. Have a great holiday. We'll reconnect here after the Thanksgiving break. So we'll get a show in the can probably the Monday or Tuesday after the Thanksgiving holiday. And thanks again for taking the time to listen to these shows. I love connecting with our fans. If you need anything from me in terms of our show or have any great requests for somebody you want to hear from, find me on that Twitter machine, the X machine as it is, at Gorgomatic 21. And you can always be a part of our show if you want to be one of the lead advertisers. We'd love to have you. Andrew Height's the guy to connect with, and his email is right there, aheight@talknorth.com. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We will connect after the holiday. And once again, really appreciate being the guy that gets to sit here on Wooden Sticks and talk hockey with you on a weekly basis.